Charles, very good morning to you. Happy New Year to you.
Good morning, Mike, and Happy New Year to you as well.
Now, we must talk, I think, about events of the last few days, because it's been a bit of a confusing picture, and I don't wish to be unkind to the FBI, but they haven't exactly covered themselves in glory in looking into the events surrounding both the situation in New Orleans and in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is that the FBI, at least in terms of what happened in New Orleans, initially yesterday, they said that they thought that the driver of the vehicle that went on this rampage through Bourbon Street, killing 15 people and injuring about 30 plus others, by the way, they said yesterday that they thought that he did not act alone.
Right.
Today, without really explaining why they've changed their tune, today they say they're pretty confident that he did act on his own. So it's a little bit baffling on why they went from one extreme to the other in a pretty short period of time.
Well, exactly. And also on the first press conference day, they actually came out and said it was not a terrorist incident, even though they were sharing the stage with the mayor of New Orleans, who had already said that it was a terrorist incident.
Yes, that's right. And it really got to the point where it went all the way to the White House with President Biden actually saying that it was a terrorist incident. And, and there's good reason to think that. This particular person, the person who was driving the car, he posted a number of things on Facebook, his Facebook page, several hours actually before this happened in New Orleans. And, initially one of the postings said he had a desire to kill his family. Then he kind of backed away from that. And then on another Facebook page, he talked about how he was inspired. I don't know how someone can be inspired, but he was inspired by ISIS. And so that's what is leading the FBI and now even the White House to conclude that this was a terrorist act. But I should point out that they're not saying, at least now, that anyone in ISIS, for example, directed him to do this. They're simply saying that he found some sort of affinity with this particular terrorist group, believed in their ideology, perhaps, and then felt motivated for some yet inexplicable reason to go on this rampage.
Yes, it's weird, isn't it? I mean, there's a big piece in the Mail today here talking about the man himself, Shamsuddin Jabbar, who served in Afghanistan, won a war on terrorism medal, right? And he then went to Egypt a couple of years ago, and the question is being asked whether that was something that somehow radicalized him in some way if he met up with people. But, I mean, you'd have to worry, wouldn't you, that somebody like that, who appears to be a pretty ordinary, run-of-the-mill American citizen, worked in property, served in the armed forces, was a completely, would appear to be a completely patriotic individual, but has suddenly now become a deadly killer at the hands of a car.
Yes, and that is always the fear of law enforcement, not only in the United States, but pretty much anywhere, which is the sort of lone wolf, if you will, terrorist, because it's almost impossible to find them before the act. It's very difficult to then even find out why they committed the act unless they leave some sort of manifesto behind. And as far as we know, this particular person did not. It's a vexing problem for law enforcement, and I don't really think there is a good answer.
No, I think is probably what you say there. Let's have a look at what Joe Biden had to say.
And so we're also continuing to investigate whether or not there's any connection between the New Orleans attack and the explosion in Las Vegas. As of now, they've just been briefed. They have not found any evidence of such a connection thus far. I've directed them to keep looking. The individual who rented the truck that exploded in Las Vegas also served as active duty U.S. Army. And the FBI is working with the Department of Defense on investigating, including the service members' possible motives and all those he worked with, who served with him, with things he'd say and do. I directed my team to accelerate these investigations so we have answers to our unanswered questions and making every single resource available to get the job done. And we're going to share the facts as soon as I learn them so the American public doesn't have to wonder.
So clearly there's some confusion, because I guess, I mean, the difficulty, as you say, is a problem for law enforcement. They can't work out why people suddenly become radicalised and do these things. There's always been a long history as well, hasn't there, in America, of kind of, you know, lone terrorist attacks motivated by all manner of different things, going all the way back to Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma. But this guy who carried out the Cybertruck attack in Las Vegas, I mean, would appear to just have been somebody who didn't like Donald Trump very much.
Yeah, and that perhaps is the more puzzling of the two, horrible, really, incidents, the one in New Orleans and the one in Las Vegas. And I say that because the one in Las Vegas is very odd. This is the person who was active U.S. military. The one in New Orleans was in reserve, so former, really. So he was active. He rents this Cybertruck, and one would have to presume, although I always hesitate to jump to too many conclusions and things like this, but one would have to presume that there was some symbolism involved, that he rents a Cybertruck, which of course is Tesla product, which obviously is a company that Elon Musk is CEO of. He then drives around, and the cameras in Las Vegas picked that up. He was driving around for quite a bit, and then drives up to the front of the Trump Hotel, when Trump and Elon Musk, of course, have become sort of best buds now, and then apparently shoots himself in the head, because the Tesla, the Cybertruck blows up, but a fraction of a second, apparently, after he killed himself with a gun. So this is, of the two, perhaps the most unusual.
Yeah, it really is. And he's a serving member, as you say, in the military as we speak, right? So, again, difficult to work out what would encourage somebody to behave like that. All we've seen really so far have been videos that he's been associated with, that his wife has put out, about Donald Trump.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. If you go back, for example, to the guy who did the deed in New Orleans, I spoke earlier today, Mike, with a childhood friend of his. They went to high school together, and then after high school, they communicated for a good number of years through Facebook, and they terminated the relationship in 2019. And what the former friend told me when I asked, well, why did you terminate it? He said, well, you know, he was always a pretty normal kind of guy growing up. And then he became very infatuated, he said to me, with Islam. And it got to the point where he said he became so ideological that they just couldn't get along anymore. And so he terminated the relationship and hadn't, he said, communicated with him since 2019. So there's, again, a case of somebody who, in formative years, would not give out any indication at all that they were destined to do something as atrocious as what happened in New Orleans, and yet he did.
Right. And the other, I suppose, aspect of all of it is the security itself in New Orleans. We were talking earlier on the show to Benedict Spence, who said, oh, you know, I don't really like the idea that we have to somehow arm ourselves against these attacks. But I think I'd rather have the bollards than the dead bodies, you know, as I said to him. And it seems as though New Orleans didn't really have very much protection. When you see the video footage of the pickup truck driving slowly along a road and then suddenly just making a violent right turn past a police car, and the police even describing, you know, he drove around our blockages. Well, he didn't really drive around them. He didn't have to drive around them because there really weren't any there.
Yeah, they used to have these bollards that would have been a way of obstructing any vehicular, traffic in the area. But apparently there was some issue a few years ago, and they were in the process of being repaired. That being said, one would think that with an event as big as New Year's Eve, and you know, in New Orleans, New Year's Eve, especially on Bourbon Street, that's a big event, and every year it attracts tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of locals and tourists. So one would have thought that even if they were fixing what was normally there, they would have come up with a better solution than one or two police cars, because, as you said, correctly, Mike, he just drove around the cars. It wasn't a big. You know.
Exactly. I mean, you could have even moved. I know it's easy to say now, but you could have even had the police car slightly more centrally parked in the street, as opposed to with enough room for somebody to go around it. But there we are. Charles, good to talk to you. Let's just hope it is an isolated incident and there aren't more of these characters waiting and lurking around to do harm to local people in the US of A.